Reminder, now Representative Barker is here, so you do now have a quorum.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Just a reminder, which is to release the reports through the committee today so that they will be available to other legislative committees here in the near future. So that way we can get our work out. I do want to give you kind of the highlights so that you have some talking points in mind in case other members of the legislature were to come to you. You're of course free to ask me any questions. I've tried to do my research, but I'm not the deep, in-depth subject matter expert that our audit supervisor are. So there may be some questions today that I might field from you that I will have to take back. Also, we have a number of agency officials that are available for questions from the committee that are on the video conference. So if that's something you want, but we have no prepared remarks currently. So my plan had been, I will present kind of these quick kind of 2-minute summaries of our audit reports. I will look to the chair if she ever wants to interrupt me. As you can just catch my attention, I'll try to keep an eye on her. Otherwise, I plan to go through all of them and then take questions for me and agency officials at the end. And of course, if there's a report you hear today that you want us to come back as staff and present to the committee in more detail and depth in the future, we're happy to do that. That's always at your disposal. So, if we whet your appetite today and you say, I'd really like to have summaries or in-depth presentation as post-audit committee, I can certainly work with the chair and we make that happen in the future. The idea here is to buy us some time while the legislature, the state house in general gets prepared for this virtual environment, COVID, and how we're going to handle that. So this is kind of a buy some time type of scenario. We try to give you all what we can, but also buy us some time to see if we can get some better resolutions to this. So, Madam Chair, with that, with your permission, I'll just go ahead and start summarizing the audit reports that we're releasing today to the committee members.
Absolutely, and thank you for doing that. One thing I do want to mention to the committee, I think, and Justin's talked about this before, the podcasts that they have created on every audit that goes through, and there were a couple that were sent out on economic development, kind of the process they go through with the audits, and then an angel investment report. If you haven't listened to those, I was just always extremely impressed with not only the depth of knowledge, but just the delivery by our auditors on these complex subjects. So I encourage you to open up those links and have a listen, especially you, Representative Williams, on you were an important part of what we did to make everything transparent. So this is kind of a bow around the present. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and always good to hear that if those are being beneficial to committee members. So certainly we have all of you in mind as we develop this. Glad if they're hitting the mark and helping you all do your work a little better. Okay, so you'll notice here I've got the agenda pulled up for those are joining us at video conference. The first item here is the KBI fingerprinting project. So as you'll recall, we monitor some IT projects throughout the year to try to help make sure that they are not at risk for failure. So this is a function we've been doing now for several years. We've been monitoring KBI's project to update its fingerprinting system since January 2020. So you've heard a couple of reports or received a couple of reports from us in the past. The good news is that project is currently in satisfactory status in terms of scope, cost, and security planning, and is just slightly behind in terms of the scheduling. So you might also recall, for you of those paying attention to this, they needed some funding for the system and were able to get that appropriated to them through the state's coronavirus fund. We had some funding set aside and they were recently given money to help move forward with this project. So that was something we had alerted you all as legislators and as the post-audit committee to the fact that they were in danger of not having funding for that. They were able to secure it just a few months ago. So that really mitigates a lot of our current concerns on that. We hope to continue monitoring this project in the future until it is completed. That's an item we'll talk about later, but that's the current status of the IT project monitoring we're doing. The second report there that you'll see is the 2020 recommendation follow-up. So as you all know, and a little bit later today, you'll be hearing that we will be updating our website with agency responses to previous year's audit recommendations. In addition to that process, which is entirely self-reported, we asked the committee to select some audit recommendations that they think would be benefited by having us go do some boots on the ground audit work to actually look at what evidence they can provide that they are taking action in some of those arenas. So for the 2020 recommended, you all picked some and approved that audit. So we actually looked at 3 audits that we had done in 2018. What we saw was we did see evidence that KDHE had implemented 3 of the 4 recommendations we had remade or had made related to improving the KDHE's oversight of the CAN-CARE program. So for example, they now include penalties in their contracts for MCOs who do not provide accurate data. So that's a contract change that they made so they can have some greater accountability. There's several other recommendations that give you a little bit of an idea of some of the things we're looking at there. We were unable to determine if they had implemented our 4th recommendation, and that's because the way we had written that recommendation was that they build a process to better evaluate their Medicaid data to determine whether it was good for management purposes. That part we could do. We kind of see that they've taken some steps to better build a process. The second part of our audits, and so we could see that they had taken some action to build a process. We couldn't, within the scope of this audit, evaluate its effectiveness. That's generally true of all these things. We're just looking for evidence that they've taken action. We can't, in the time span we have, it'd take almost another audit of each of these subjects to go back and determine effectiveness. But that's why out of the 4 recommendations we had, the KDHE for CAN-CARE, we could determine they had taken steps to implement 3 of them, but 1 was a little bit undetermined. We had done another audit looking at KDHE and others' roles in managing Medicaid eligibility for inmates, and we found that they have taken action to implement one of those recommendations. They now get daily reports on Medicaid beneficiaries who are entering and exit local jails, they tell us, because that clearly can affect someone's eligibility for Medicaid. That was not something we felt they'd been tracking sufficiently before, so they reported, and we saw evidence that they had built a process for that. And finally, we saw evidence that the Department of Agriculture had taken steps to implement all 5 recommendations we had related to their animal facilities inspection program. So for example, the program appears to now be working with K-State to provide statutorily required training for its inspectors. And it is also including some performance goals for those inspectors and evaluating them on an annual basis. So that's a quick summary of that report, some of the findings. We go much more detail in the report itself into what the recommendations we made were and what the agencies, what evidence we saw that they had taken actions.
Okay, so are there any members of the committee that have questions for either Justin or any of the agency officials that are on Zoom? Seeing none. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll then proceed to the next couple of audits, if I may.
Please.
So you'll see here, the next up is the price verification audit. So just as a quick way of background, price verification inspections check to determine whether retail businesses are charging consumers the appropriate prices that they've listed. And in Kansas, based on the Department of Agriculture's process, a business fails inspection if more than 2% of the items the inspectors check are mispriced, which is pretty stringent requirement. What we found in that audit is that in fiscal years 2018 through 2022, retail businesses failed most price and the Kansas Department of Agriculture did not respond consistently to those failures. So to do that work, we reviewed inspection data for fiscal years 2018 to 2020. We found that very few businesses were inspected. So KDA inspected no more than 7% of retail businesses in any of those years. And the businesses they did inspect failed about 60% of the inspections that were performed. Though the failed inspections were kind of a mix of both over and under price charges. We reviewed some of those failed inspections that the Department of Agriculture should have followed up on, and we found that they did not conduct timely follow-ups in about 75% of the inspections we looked at, and that they also weren't as aggressive as they could have been in enforcing financial penalties. We think those issues stem from KDA not having enough inspection staff. They currently only have 4 staff to cover the entire state, and that includes some other work as scale and gasoline inspections. We also think it's a matter of KDA not necessarily prioritizing this particular part of their function over, say, scale inspections. We recognize that when they find problems, they sometimes do, but overall, on the balance, our impression was that scale inspections from some of the other tasks not having enough inspection staff, they currently only have 4 electronic verification inspections. So And then we also know that we think the Department of Agriculture tends to try to work with businesses instead of penalizing them, which we understand that we want to be working with businesses, but in this case, as a regulatory function, that may not create a lot of incentive, obviously, for these businesses to make sure they're cleaning up their act. Another part of this audit is we looked to other states to see what practices they had when it comes to these types of price verification inspections. We found that other states like Kansas didn't necessarily have a good threshold for what adequate coverage would look like. They don't always make their price verification inspections a top priority either. Their inspectors, often like ours, have other duties, the scale inspection, gasoline. So fairly similar to other states in that regard. We did identify a few strategies through our work with other states that Kansas can consider or could consider. I think it's fair to say Department of Agriculture didn't think many of those necessarily would work or apply well in Kansas, but we have put those in the report and included, kind of our view and the agency's view of some of those ideas that we've found. We did issue 3 recommendations for Kansas Department of Agriculture. All 3 were aimed at strengthening their inspection and penalties process through program data, staffing analysis, and several other factors. And that is the summary of the price verification audit.
Okay, why don't you continue?
Yes, ma'am. Next up, we have the K-12 unencumbered cash balances report. So just as a reminder, a cash balance means that there is leftover money in a fund at the end of the year that is not earmarked for an impending purchase, right? So sometimes we identify we're going to make an expenditure a little bit down the road, and so we'll earmark that money. This is not earmarked, so it's not already been spent. It is free in terms of any pending expenditures. It's clear through our work. I mean, obviously, school districts need some cash balances for operating. They need funds to start the school year before they receive some of their first payments. Unexpected expenditures, unexpected delays in funding revenues, all the types of things obviously makes that a necessary part of doing business. But what we were tasked with is evaluating what districts actually do in that arena. So what we found was that after adjusting for inflation, districts' cash balances increased 35% over the last 10 years. So those balances grew from 1.6 billion in 2009 to 2.1 billion in 2019. A couple caveats though, most of the growth in those unencumbered cash balance funds were just in 10 funds. So there's 34 funds that school districts use in total, but 10 of those made up 96% of the growth that we saw over the 10-year period. Moreover, a vast amount of that money is restricted. So for example, a district may have a special education fund where it has a large existing unencumbered cash balance, but those funds can only be used for special education purposes. They can't be switched over and used to pay other types of teacher salaries or those types of operational costs. And so that was the case for most of that big reserve of cash balance. Most of it is reserved for very specific purposes. We dove in a little bit to look at how districts are actually using some of those unencumbered cash balances. We picked 25 districts to look at in detail. We reviewed $138 million across 10 funds in those districts. And we found that of that 138 million that we could review, 77% or 105 million was spent on identifiable purchases. And that included things like building construction, renovation, or maintenance. They also occasionally dipped into cash balances for regulated operating expenditures such as salaries and equipment like buses. The other 23% of that money, or $32 million, was not spent on anything tangible. Was actually the district reducing cash balances in certain funds because they were transferring it into other funds, which is possible if that fund's not restricted. Finally, we try to gauge how much districts should have in cash balances available. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends districts maintain cash balances equal to about 2 months of operating expenditures. And we found that 15 of our 25 districts maintained balances that met or exceeded that minimum, the minimum that best practices suggested, while the other 10 did not. So there's quite a bit of variety actually there when you look at the districts. We have a figure in the report that shows how many have more than what best practices. We did not have any recommendations in the K-12 unencumbered cash balance report, and that concludes my summary of that one.
Do You want to just continue going through and then we'll open it up for questions?
Yes, ma'am. Just to want to make sure that was okay. Okay, so the one I'm on now here is the Kansas Highway Patrol personnel actions. This was a limited scope audit that the committee, if you recall, had asked us to perform the last time we met, which seems like quite a while back. Keep in mind, as I talk through this, it's going to be very short and sweet. We looked at the administrative procedures, so that we did not look at other types of issues surrounding these cases. And of course, there can be many. There's been a lot, I know, out on news media and social media about these cases and the Highway Patrol in this regard. But at a limited scope audit, we were tasked with simply looking at whether the Highway Patrol followed applicable state laws and regulations. We found that they actually had done that. So just as a brief background, in 2020, Governor Kelly announced that 2 majors had been dismissed from the Kansas Highway Patrol. That's noteworthy because a Kansas Highway Patrol major has not been dismissed for at least 25 years, let alone 2 in one day. So there's obviously some controversy, and it's a little bit of an unusual situation. So we evaluated whether the department followed applicable requirements related to those dismissals. We, of course, did not evaluate the reasons for the dismissal or the intent behind them. That's kind of a different and much larger audit question. What we found is that most uniformed officers at the KHP are classified employees, but certain high-ranking positions are not. They are unclassified. Unclassified positions are at-will positions, which means they can be dismissed at any time for any reason. Both of the majors were unclassified employees. So as a result, there were very few steps the Highway Patrol is actually required by state law and regulation to follow in their dismissal. So first, state law requires that a major be returned to his or her previous rank upon termination. So KHD demoted one of the majors to the rank of captain as required by state law. The other one resigned. State law requires an employee demoted from an unclassified position, which is in this case major, to a classified position, be put on probation. They immediately were. State regulation allows an agency to dismiss an employee serving a probationary period at any time during that period for any reason, which is what they did. So it's a little bit of an unusual process, but we found that all of the actual statutory and legal steps that were taken were followed appropriately and done according to that plan. Okay, thank you. So I gotta know this real quick. All right, got a little bit distracted. So we made no recommendations. That was a very limited scope audit report. That's all that we were looking at. There, we did not have anything additional to include. The final report that I have is on economic development evaluations. We actually sent the committee 2 documents. One was a primer and one was the actual report itself. So the primer is just a reference document that we as staff have put together to try to help provide legislators a framework for how this program or how evaluating economic development incentives might work. It's a very complicated business. We try to boil it down. That's a reference guide for you and your fellow legislators. We ask that if you find it valuable to share it. It's just a very high level, trying to put some perspective on some considerations. Obviously, this is a complicated business, so we want to kind of put some structure around that, something hopefully legislators can use as a reference document in the future. The first report then that we have done, this remember comes out of the work that Senator Lynn, Senator Representative Williams did several years ago, getting this codified to have us look at economic development incentives. This is the first report coming out of those efforts. And remember the subcommittee on economic development incentive evaluations that this committee conjured helped us come up with this list. This is one of the ones that got put on that list, and it's one of the ones we started with. We will be moving very quickly into Star Bonds project. So that's what's on the radar, but this is the first report in that economic development incentive. So our analysis on the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program focused on whether the program is meeting its goals rather than economic or fiscal impact. That's somewhat because those type of impacts are less relevant to this program, which is really geared at incentivizing investors and not geared towards incentivizing businesses to meet certain goals. So this is all just about trying to get people to invest money in certain businesses. What we found is that through the program, investors received about $20 million in income tax credits for investing about $52 million in 78 Kansas businesses during 2015 and 18. About 73% of those investments came from Kansas investors, and the remaining came from other states and territories. Those 78 businesses that received the investments were located in only 8 counties, and almost 2/3 went to businesses in Johnson County alone. However, the participating businesses in those counties did appear to us to be innovative, which would meet the definition, the statutory definition of these investments are supposed to be made for innovative companies like scientific research, IT, and pharmaceuticals. To determine the long-term program success, we looked at 2 things. One, how long these businesses operated and whether they created jobs. That's really the 2 things that commerce officials told us they focus on as the definition of program success. And we found that state law is very broad in its meaning. It didn't include anything specific criteria for us to evaluate against. So we used Commerce's definition. We compared 181 businesses who received angel investments to a control group of 65 similar businesses to see what difference participation in the program made. We found that in terms of length of operation, only 28% of the program participants lasted 5 years, whereas 38% of our control group lasted, but it was not statistically different. So even though it was a little bit, the non-control or our control group actually did a little bit better than the participating companies, the results were not statistically meaningful, which just means it could just be random chance. We have no reason to conclude that the program made a difference one way or the other, so they came about. When it comes to job creation, however, the businesses that were participating in the Angel Investors Program actually did a little bit worse. They created 1 job every 2 years on average, but our control group created about 1 job every year on average. And that one was statistically meaningful. So that we do actually think that the program, that there is a meaningful difference between those groups. And in this case, the angel investing group actually performed less well than our control group who had not received those investments. Now, we couldn't tell whether what that means about the program. There's actually 2 logical conclusions, and given where we are today and what we know about the program today, the program could either be viewed as successful because it could be argued that the programs receiving those investments were less likely to succeed than the control group, and therefore the money that they received helped keep them equal to those companies, which would mean that the program would be meaningful in that regard, that it's helping create businesses and help them survive in ways that they couldn't otherwise. The other way to interpret that, of course, is that the program is not, if those businesses in our control group are in every way similar, and not some way to disadvantage to the participating businesses, the fact that they received angel investments, that we forewent $20 million of tax revenue to create them, but they didn't perform any better than their control group, would mean the program could not be successful. So if we can't determine which of those 2 things currently, based on the data we have the information, but that's where we landed. We did have a couple of other findings. So we did find that the Department of Commerce had not taken back some credits that it had given companies who left Kansas before the statutory timeframe of 10 years. And Commerce doesn't actually like that 10-year requirement. It thinks it actually prohibits companies from exiting Kansas in positive ways. So it wasn't really paying a lot of attention necessarily at the time of that, or believe that that's a good requirement in any case. But we noted that there was, if memory serves, $300-some thousand of potential credits have been given that probably should have been called back to comp. We also noted, of course, that this program will sunset in 2021 unless the legislature extends it during the 2021 legislative session. So we did recommend, and we recommended Commerce to need to enforce the state law as it's currently written. But we also suggested to the legislature that they consider amending that state law to maybe soften that 10-year exit requirement, maybe make it a little shorter, to allow businesses who succeed under this gracefully leave the state. That's going to be a policy decision, but we because Commerce had raised that, we said you need to get in line with state laws as it is today, but we do think it might be worth the legislature reconsidering whether they really want that to be requirement. So, Madam Chair, I've covered a lot of ground. That's my last audit. I know I went through that fairly quickly compared to what we normally do in these audits. Happy to stand for any questions that you may have.
And thank you, Justin. Are there any, is Dave Sofer on the line?
Yes, Madam Chair, he is. He didn't have prepared remarks, but he is available for questions if the committee has any.
Oh, okay. I'll start off. Thanks for being here, David. After hearing the podcast and then listening to Justin again, I recall, I don't know if it was last year, I think it might have been last year, where there was a fear that the angel investment would be, I don't know if it was sunsetting, but you just said it was sunsetting in 2021, but there seemed like there was a real push to keep this program in place because it was working. And I don't, I'm still kind of unclear about, really bottom line what it's brought in terms of, I mean, we heard about the jobs, but in terms of revenue, was there a way that, is there any way you can estimate what that revenue would have been, or would be, or has been over the past couple of years of this program? Is that data available anywhere?
First of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. David Sofer, Legislative and Policy Director at the Kansas Department of Commerce. Chairwoman, I can certainly see if we can get that information. I know one of the projects we had undertaken last year was to begin to formulate kind of a history of every single angel investment company that has gone through the program and where they've ended up. Excuse me. So we can get you that data and that information. I think the important thing to remember, the only thing I would clarify is that, the angel program itself, what it's meant to do is be able to take innovative ideas and allow it to compete in the global market. We want our innovators and entrepreneurs to have a chance to be able to compete on the global market. Not necessarily every single entrepreneur has access to that capital. That's why the angel program exists. It exists in over 30 plus states in very similar fashions. It helps our entrepreneurs and innovators, again, that don't have that access to capital to be able to offer this tax credit in order to be able to gain that access. It's a very critical part to many of those entrepreneurs and investors and the like to be able to, again, have that opportunity. Most companies that don't take part in the program either have access to that capital or find our guidelines to simply be too restrictive. As Justin mentioned, that 10-year component is very, limits companies. For example, if a company were to be approached by a buyer to sell, it creates a very difficult situation where then they have to, the state would claw back those funds, and that could prevent a potential sale. So as a result, even though the sale could benefit the state as far as being able to get back that revenue plus potential any profit through the taxes on that sale, that 10 years really creates a difficult situation. And for that reason, many companies don't necessarily take part. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. It's not necessarily just about jobs. It does bring a lot of innovative ideas to the table. And it has allowed quite a few Kansas companies to be sold over the years. Some have stayed in the state, some have not.
Yeah, I think it's critical to get, I think, a little bit more information about the program. And I think it needs to be, I think the data needs to show that it is working. Because we want the innovators, obviously, to be successful here in Kansas, but we also want them to stay here. So might be kind of interested, David, if in your collection of data and answering these questions, if you could find out or put in your list, what are those companies that have actually left Kansas, and as opposed to those who have stayed in Kansas. I just think that's an important little data piece to know.
Madam Chair, you have Representative Gardner and Senator Hildebrand both have questions too.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Madam Chair. David, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Hey, hi, David. A follow-up question from Madam Chair is, since this program is set to sunset in 2021, my assumption is, and this I assume, that you'll be going to the appropriate committees during the 21 legislature to make a presentation to about the angel investor program and why it should stay in place and continue on. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes.
What committees would that be, David?
Generally speaking, it has gone to each Commerce Committee with each chamber.
Both House and Senate. And if you do that, I assume, I know the chairs will be getting a copy, the committees will be getting a copy of the LPA. But at that point in time, will you make recommendations on what's working good, what's not working, making or addressing appropriate changes going forward?
Yeah, so actually, I guess this speaks to the chairwoman's point. Last year we did bring a bill. We wanted to try to get it done a year early. So it was House Bill 2689 in the session. So that was to extend the angel investor tax credit. In that bill, we had a recommendation of about 7 or 8 different ideas that we thought we could tweak the program. One of them, which the audit did touch on, is the fact we would like to see tech companies, not bioscience. Bioscience is a little more complicated because of approval, but tech companies reduced from a 10-year clawback to 5 years. That's the feedback we've gotten from many companies. So we do have 7 or 8 recommendations. I can certainly send them along. We expect that bill to remain exactly the same going into 2021 session.
Okay, that'd be nice. I'd like to maybe see those recommendations.
Sure thing.
Now, thanks for clarifying that, David, because when you're in the legislature, you don't remember every detail. I just remember it was important at the time. So it sounds like it's still important. So that's good. Okay. Are there any other questions for any of the, either for Justin or for any of the members on the line for any of the conferees?
Madam Chair, I had a question.
Yes.
It's primarily for Justin, but I might have a follow-up for Dave. Justin, I just want to clarify, make sure I heard you correctly. Did you say there was $300,000 in tax credits that should have been clawed back but weren't?
Let me find you the actual number here, maybe during a low center, and I'll get you that answer exactly.
Okay, but was it
the report?
Was it similar to that? I mean, was it that large of a number?
Yeah, that's what comes to mind. I will go back and check on the specific dollar amount. It's towards the very end of the report. I'll look that up and try to get that to you while we're still in the meeting, Senator, so we have that information.
Okay.
Justin, I think it's 340,000.
Okay.
On page 13.
Page 13.
Okay, so it adds to my question, and I found it. So that was only for 3 businesses that had the $340,000 in tax credits, but 16 businesses had left before the 10 years. Is that correct? Do we know why 3 businesses were not clawed back and 13 were? And who came to that decision to make 13 pay and 3 not?
So I think that would be maybe a question best directed to Mr. Sofer from the Department of Commerce. And I don't know if he'll have a ready response to that today, since that's kind of a nuanced question. Yet I will allow David to maybe try to address that. If he needs more time to collect that and provide to the committee, Madam Chair, we'll work to make sure that the committee members get that information following the meeting per our standard process. So David, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Sure. So I don't have any specific answers. I'd have to ask our chief counsel exactly why. I do know one of the things that we've tried to do is go back. There was a little bit of inconsistent way in how the program was run previously. So what we aim to do as of 2019 and what we were supposed to do in 2020 before the pandemic hit was we actually were going to do site visits of various locations to make sure that the business is indeed up and running and that they're not just filing with a certain address. So there has been a little bit of inconsistency on that end. We've worked to kind of change that. So now 2019 going forward, if you apply for credits each year, you get a site visit from us and you will get a site visit going forward until the clawback years are over. But I have to double check as far as why previously certain businesses were required to pay up, and then why others were not clawed back.
And do we know if it's too late to still go after that clawback for that 340,000 or?
So I remember going through the process. I know one of them, we are actually looking into it right now. There is a bit of a dispute as far as where their location is. I believe they've filed as a location in both Missouri and Kansas. And so from our end, it's showing that their parent company is in Kansas. And so we're trying to dig in as to where the actual company itself is located, and then whether by statute that meets the requirement or not. I think the other two, it might have passed, but there's one that we're still looking into.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for David Sofer?
I do, Chairwoman.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so looking at page 12 and page 3, and David, can you go ahead and repeat for us? It says here that this program cost Kansas $20.2 million in tax credits, and in exchange for about $51 million in investment. And then on page 12, it says that out of each of the 181 participating businesses we've reviewed, create about one job every 2 years. So in total, and I probably missed it, but in total, out of the $20 million and the $50 million worth of investment, Kansas lost $20 million in tax, or however you want to say it. How many jobs were created and sustained for that period of time?
So if I'm correct, let's see. So I'm just trying to catch up here on page 12. So I believe it was the total jobs in the 10 years that they reviewed were about, I believe, somewhere around 500 net jobs in total. But again, I think the thing to keep in, so I don't know as far as what you're referring to, or you say we lost 20 million.
Well, that was just, that's not a good way to phrase it, but there was $20 million in investment. So for every $20 million in tax credits given, then 50 million was invested. So those investors got $20 million, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I meant.
So again, I think that the thing to keep in mind, so one of the things with Angel Investor that's different from some of our other incentive programs is this is really geared towards high-risk companies. So as a result, again, you're kind of getting them some capital to be able to get their idea out to the market. Some are going to succeed. A lot of them are not. That's understood with the nature of the industry itself and kind of what the type of companies we're trying to get. But as a result, so I can't remember the name of the company, but it will be in my report. But one of our companies ended up being sold to Alibaba. And I believe the state netted about somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 million as a result of that one sale alone. Those are the types of things we're looking to see. Some of them will be able to produce jobs well down the line. Some are not. Certainly in the onset, when they're part of the Angel program, they're not necessarily going to create many jobs. And that's just part of the process. It's about getting, again, our innovative entrepreneurs out to the market to be able to get their ideas the chance to succeed. And that's why the program is so critical to our state, especially as we look towards where our economy is headed. It's those innovative ideas, innovative entrepreneurs that are really going to change the landscape of the global economy. And we want to make sure to be able to provide them that opportunity. So yes, there is a little bit of a cost to the state, but we do believe it is well worth it to be able to get those folks, again, the best possible chance to compete. And certainly the state would reap the benefits of that long term.
Okay, thank you, David. And so for the reports that you're going to be providing Commerce in 2021, that you're going to include more information on the net total jobs that were gained and sustained for the 10-year period, the 5-year period.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a point of clarification, Madam Chair, Representative, in that on page 12, the actual net was 212 jobs. So the number David's referring to, the total increase from 298 to 510. So they moved from that point all the way to 510, but the actual net for that period for the participating businesses was 212 net jobs.
Thanks for the correction.
No problem. And Representative Toplicker also had a question, Madam Chair.
Oh,
Yes, thank you. I wondered, are these tax credits also can be transferred and they can be sold too? Is that right?
Correct. They can be transferred one time.
And transfer means that they're sold. Is that
Yes.
okay? And when they are sold, does the entity that they are sold to have to follow the same criteria that was set up originally for the first company to get the tax credit?
No, so the way it works is the company provides a 50% tax credit up to a certain amount for the investment. And then once the investor gets the tax credit as a result of that investment, the tax credit can then be transferred by the investor to somebody else. And then it's just a tax credit for whoever it is they transfer it to.
And so do we keep track, or are we keeping track of how many are sold and how many of these credits are sold and who they're sold to?
Yes, so Department of Commerce, Department of Revenue work together to be able to keep track of the transfers. I couldn't tell you how much necessarily they transfer for, but we can, I think, be able to tell you how many of them were transferred over a certain period of time.
Is that in this report? I didn't really notice that it was in the report.
I don't know. I know that the auditors, and maybe Justin, I don't know if you might be able to add, I know the auditors did do a review of the transfers. I don't believe it's in the report itself, but I know they did look through it, at least in a very general sense.
Representative, I'll have our auditors look back through our audit documentation to see what type of detail we might have on that, and whatever we can provide you, we will.
Okay, thank you.
you know, those are really good questions. You know, I was wondering, David, and thank you for the question, John, about the transfers and being able to sell them. What happens to those credits then? Do we just write those off if they're sold to somebody, you know, out of state? How does that work?
What do you mean by write them off?
Well, I mean, if a credit is transferred to another state, I guess, tell me what then happens. What's the state's interest in that credit?
So, I mean, it would depend, right? So they would have to have tax liability in the state of Kansas. But I have to double check. I'm not necessarily as familiar with all the rules with out of state. So I don't be quoted as saying something where I may not be 100% accurate. So let me get back to you specifically on the out of state side and talk with revenue about that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to understand. I think it's important to understand that part. So great. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee to either Justin or David?
It's like Representative, oh, nope.
Nope.
I'm not seeing any, Madam Chair.
Seeing none. Okay. Well, that was a good conversation and good questions. So let's move on then. Justin. For the Department of Ag?
So, Madam Chair, those are just we had a list of other agencies that are available for questions. So that was Department of Ag was one of them, in addition to many others. But assuming the committee members have no other questions, we'd be ready to move on actually to legislative post-audit operations.
Great, perfect.
Madam Chair?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I do have a quick question concerning the audits. If I could, it's a general question. And I know the audits are sent to the appropriate committees.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering I mean, we don't have any basis, or, for example, what I'm concerned with, and you know, there's a couple like the price valuation, or the price verification process. And, you know, I know it's going to go to the Ag Committee, and it's going to go over to the Senate. But what takes place then? I mean, is it up to the chair to then call the Ag Department in and say, okay, tell us about this. What are you doing to fix it? I mean, it's great to have these, and I love the audit process, but if there's nothing followed up or done, you know, I know we can request it as a committee member on LPA, that we can request additional information, but I guess, do we have the authority or a hammer that says, we want you to, you know, have a hearing or go through this process?
Well, you know, that's a great question, and one that's always kind of bothered me over my years in the legislature, because we have a powerful tool with these audits, but we really don't have, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, or if I'm verbalizing this correctly, we really don't have a hammer. They're recommendations only. So that's why we go back and look at, say, for example, some school districts, and we look and see what, you know, what they've done, if anything, and what they've, you know, there are progress reports, but no, there isn't really a mechanism there in place to give us that authority. Now, if you're a committee chair, or if you're a member of a committee, and you receive information through post audit that is a concern to you and your constituents, then I don't see any reason why you couldn't approach your committee chair or draft legislation yourselves to create a solution and run it through the process. That's how I understand this. And, you know, maybe it's better that way because it gets more eyeballs on it, but then of course it takes time. And what I think we don't want to do as a committee is to use any information that we have to punish certain agencies or people or whatever. I think the information that comes through our committee is sensitive. It's important. It's probably as close to what we would get as legislators for finding out what's going on the inside, and how we can make things better. And so I think as a committee and as committee members, it is our duty to raise the issues that we're concerned with, and hopefully work through the process to get something accomplished as a solution. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate that response, and I understand my concern, as yours and probably a number of other legislators, is that committees receive these, that they go public after our meeting today. They're sent out and they gather dust and nothing's ever done. So that's what really my concern was and is. And, you know, I don't know if we can, at least as a committee, as an LPA committee, at least suggest that a committee chair maybe look in or have a hearing or look into the particular recommendations or the response or that's at least pointed out in the post audit to take a look at that. Just a question.
No, and I think I appreciate you bringing the question up, and hopefully there'll be some of the people on the committee now will be thinking through what's just been talked about. This committee, I take this committee very seriously because obviously it's about our constituents, no matter what we look at, the bottom line. So Justin, is there anything that you would want to add to my response on that?
No, I think you got it correctly, Madam Chair. I would mention the committee, occasionally, I mean, this issue comes up periodically, and I appreciate it. I understand the motive behind it. Sometimes people suggest the auditors should be given more power. I tell them as flattering as that is, that's probably not a great idea. You should not be giving the auditors the ability to tell agency management what to do, right? That actually compromises our independence long-term. It also would make me the most powerful state employee in Kansas, which again, flattering, but probably not a great idea. So, auditors, I think, need to stay out of that fray. You are correct. We depend largely on the legislators individually to carry the water on how they want to see that. Over time, I often do see agencies implement recommendations, but whether they implement them exactly the way you all want or intend is a good question. And it does rely somewhat on you all to pay attention to those issues independently as the system currently stands. But,
very good. Any further questions?
Madam Chair.
Representative Williams.
And I would just also add that it does inform our Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriation Committees as we make decisions, whether it's Department of Labor or whether it's ag, and whether or not money needs to be allocated for personnel. So I think historically it has been used to make appropriations. And as a chair of House Budget for Education, we'll receive anything that's related to that. And as chairs, we are sent that information, or at least we're alerted to that information so that we know it's there, that we can share it with our committee members, we can act upon it. And so I also think it not only informs us as members of the legislature, but it also informs the administration, especially changing administrations. They can go look at past audits and determine whether or not there needs to be changes in how they structure their administration. And Governor Kelly does have an opportunity, even though this is a legislative state post audit, her administration still has opportunity to look at it and say, wait a minute, well, maybe if we're doing that poorly on price verifications, maybe I need to change my budget and increase funding for a couple new people, part of the Department of Ag. So, I mean, I do think there are, to Representative Gartner's question, I think it's really up to all of us. Mm-hmm. So I think it does serve its purpose. It's just whether or not we do what we should with it.
Madam Chair, I agree with Representative Williams completely, except some chairs, some individuals aren't as diligent as she is.
Well, and I would second that. So, well, and really, not to sound too esoteric, but all of us have an equal amount of capacity as legislators to do what we believe is for the good of the people in the state. And it just falls back on us, and as it should. So anyway, thank you. Those are great questions, great discussion. Okay, moving on, Justin, to the annual IT security plan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I pulled up, just for your reference, this memorandum. So this would have normally been in tab A if you had your physical committee notebooks, but this is the IT security plan. Just a brief reminder, state law requires that we conduct these IT security audits. This has been in place for many years now. So typically the way that we do that is we survey all 105-ish state agencies every 3 years to determine what type of data they have and how sensitive it is. We develop a risk assessment based on that. We select some agencies to audit. And we'd come to you and say, here's the agencies we want to audit for the next calendar year. So in this past year, we selected 7 agencies to audit. We're finishing that up right now and getting ready to redo that cycle. So committee rules say we need to prepare that plan. This is usually a pretty innocuous piece of business. We just come and say, hey, can we audit the, here's the agencies we propose, and unless you guys have significant concerns or other things that goes through. This year, we're proposing something different. So one of our concerns with this IT security function, and today's meeting highlights one of these problems, is because the information is so sensitive, we only present it to you in executive session, in person, and we hand you the red binders and we take them right back, right? So we don't let them be out there. You only get a few minutes to get it. And that's because those reports have a lot of sensitive information we're concerned could be used by hackers and others if they're ever to get out to hurt Kansas taxpayers, which would be the exact opposite of the reason we do these audits. However, the problem with that is, even though I think that makes the agencies very well aware of the deficiencies, I'm sure many of you have been on the committee many years, noticed that these reports sound pretty similar and we keep finding issues in this arena. So we did some brainstorming of a way to maybe try to find a middle ground here we'd suggest the committee consider. So our proposal here, you can see, is that this year what we'd like to try to do is we'd like to do school districts this year. So that's one little change. That's not a real substantive change. We actually did one school district this year as kind of a pilot run. We feel like that's an area it's not really audited in the state, and we think that there's some real risk there because school districts hold a lot of sensitive FERPA information, student medical records, student financial records, lots of things that actually should be protected. They don't get a lot of audit coverage. They don't have a lot going on. So we think that they just make it sense. We think it makes sense at this point in time. So we've been doing these audits for many years to turn our attention. That doesn't mean every year we'd want to do only school districts. We probably wouldn't, but this year we wanted to get some coverage there. Secondarily, what we'd like to do is do them in batch and then release a report at the end where we can come out in public session and talk about the themes that we see while hiding their individual identity so that you as policymakers and the general public can hear about whatever issues we find, the problems that we're concerning, but in a way that gives them anonymity and keeps their individual, so a hacker wouldn't know exactly who to go after. There's still some hazards there. Someone might argue, well, if you talk about weak passwords and it was pervasive, then people will know. And that's true. What we hear in the IT security community, though, is, yeah, but if we wait a year, they should fix it. Even if there is some of that, like we find something that's unilateral, the expectation is these things need to be addressed. So, if an agency comes and says, well, you're making me vulnerable because I have weak passwords and you're letting everyone know, our counter to that is, well, those audits were done a long time ago. We'd be very sensitive to that. I'm not saying we just release it. If we thought it was really sensitive, we might come up with other ways to release it, but we'd like to at least explore that. So that's fundamentally a different direction. I realize there's some policy questions. I wanted to bring that in front of the committee. It's a big enough change. I probably have authority to do it myself, but I really wanted your buy-in or buy-out, as the case may be. I'm looking for some guidance from you. So that is option A. We would do school districts this year, and we do the report format differently, so we would get out of these executive sessions. As you know, today, when we decided to go virtual, I pulled those from the agenda. I'm not comfortable trying to communicate those sensitive results to you virtually yet. I think it's possible and will be down the road. We're just not ready for that. I've got too many concerns. So that's one of the hazards, is unless I can see you in person, you can't get it. And that's frustrating that we have, I think, important work that we can't communicate to you just because they're all very, very sensitive. Option B, conversely, would be simply that we continue on our course as usual. And I'm fine with that as well. If that's what the committee would like us to do, then in that case, we would go back to our standard plan where we would select agencies based on their risk, and we would keep it all confidential. And you would hear those only in executive session, except for every couple of years, we typically have been doing a public report where we combine all these things. So that's some of the impetus of the idea. We do periodically come back and give you that. So, Madam Chair, I would have to answer any questions the committee has. It looks like Representative Gardner has one at least.
Okay, and Representative Gardner, and then I will ask for a motion to approve or modify and approve either option A or B. So Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Justin, on the school districts, would you try, I know you're going to batch them together, but are you saying you're going to do how many school districts in 2021?
Oh, so I think it'd be similar numbers, 6 or 7, something, and they would happen. When I say batch them, I mean batch the results, right? So we progress through the year, and you would get one report at the end of the year, a public report that said, here's the major themes. we could still always meet with you all in executive session if you wanted to know the specifics. So that would never, that would always still be an option. It just wouldn't be the only way that we get it out. The more standard way would be a public report. And then if you had more concerns, we could delve in privately with you, as opposed to today where it almost works the opposite. We meet with you all privately, and then every couple of years we release a public report.
I understand. I guess, so 6 or 7 school districts, and they would start sometime in 2021. Here's my concern only this year with the pandemic still going on. And I know this is an IT audit, but IT departments are probably pretty busy during this pandemic, dealing with broadband and virtual learning and all the problems. I'm just wondering if 2021 would be the best year to do that, or maybe put it off a year. I'm just throwing that idea out there.
Any discussion?
Senator Lynn?
Representative Williams.
So this question is for Justin. Justin, is there some other agency in the cycle that we can swap them with?
Yeah, so I think it's a good point that Representative Gurn's making, certainly during the situation we're in. So, as Senator Lynn mentioned, one way the committee could consider modifying this is to allow us to use our approach, but keep it with state agencies. So this would be a hybrid option. It would basically say, continue to audit state agencies for 2021 because they may be less likely to be, to be encumbered by that, and then the school districts. I will point out that all agencies are going to struggle with this to some degree, right? So whether it's state agency or school districts, everyone's IT is sort of. This year, the district we audited was Seaman, and in the middle of COVID, they were able to fit us in pretty well for what it's worth. Now, that may just be Seaman's position and where they were at. So I don't want to say they speak for all school districts or their experience would be. So a couple other points. I think it's wise to be sensitive of that. I don't know if other state agencies will be any different, but they're not dealing with the student factor for sure, which is a complicating factor. So the committee could ask us though to proceed, or we could, if you give us discretion, we could always do a mix. We intended either way to come back to you with a list of auditees. So, if you're okay with the concept of us batching the report into a big public report, then I could work with that and say, let us develop a proposal that might mix and match, and we might contact some districts and see what they think. And if they're like, no way, it's impossible, we could scale back the school districts and increase the state agencies. My intention would be for you all to see that list one time before we begin formally, regardless. So that may be a middle ground potentially if the committee was okay with our approach.
Any further discussion?
Looks like Representative Barker. Representative Barker, looks like you're muted there.
Okay, try it again.
There you go.
All right, I've been listening to the discussions, and I like the middle ground. I don't want to make a decision today. It's as we all know at the legislature, we have no secrets. Someone will find out which school district goes with what, and it's worked well going into executive session. I would not want to vote on a motion today that would go to option A unless we know a little more about it. And I think Justin's suggestion about coming back later when we hopefully will be meeting in person and have a further discussion on this. But that's about all I've got to say on it.
I would support what Representative Barker is saying as well.
Okay, so I guess, Justin, would we need a motion if there's no more discussion? Would we need a motion just to I guess, push this back, or no, I don't want to use the word table. But what would you suggest the motion, how it would be worded?
Yeah, so what I might suggest is this. Let's table this motion. We need to give you the IT security audits we weren't able to give you. So that's high on my agenda. I want to get those audits to you so that other committees can hear those as well. So that's already a piece of business that, because we needed to go virtual, is outstanding. So I'm going to need to schedule some time with you anyway. Let me regroup. Let me talk to my audit manager a little bit more. We won't have much more information for you. I mean, I think our plan here is we would do the audits at a little more shallow level. If the committee's concern is you're afraid that we wouldn't be able to sufficiently mask the results to keep people safe, which is totally a legitimate concern. Other states have that concern. We've had that concern for a long time. If that's where the committee lands on that, then we would just do business as usual. So that's a pretty big concept I'm laying on you. I sense the committee might want some more time to think. That's all right. Let's give you some more time to think. We'll come back to you later. It's going to be soon, I mean, as soon as we can. So we want direction from you and some approval so we can get working quickly. But if that sounds like a big idea, I think you all will want to weigh and maybe discuss, the risks and pros and cons of that. Sounds like Representative Barker has some concerns. I share them. That's a concern that's a valid one. That's why I want to bring it to the committee to get your input. So let's table. I will bring that back to the committee. There maybe won't be tons more information, but we'll provide what additional information we can to try to maybe give you some examples of what that might look like to further that discussion, and we will come back to you later if that's okay with the committee. Okay, looks like people generally.
Sounds yeah, I can't see. So, okay, so you're just going to come back to the committee. And what do you think the timing looks like on that? Is that something you need to have done before session starts?
I would like that if we can figure out a way to get the committee. I mean, that's something I'll be working with you, Madam Chair. We'll see what the committee's appetite is. It may be a very brief meeting. Again, maybe just, virtual. In that case, it have to hopefully be in person if we're going to do the executive, but I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with COVID and everything else. This may be an action item too that we could just meet for this specific item if we can't crack the nut of how to present you the IT security reports. Yeah, I'd like to do it sooner or later. We're going to get together and get a little creative. There's some other ways maybe we could handle the IT security reports. So I will put this in a batch of things to bring back to this committee soon, whether that's before session or right early on. I'm not sure. My preference is to get it acted on fairly soonish. So
okay, perfect.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Justin, I don't know if it's possible, but I know a lot of us will be in Topeka next Monday for leadership elections, and that may be too fast of a turnaround. But if there is a possibility that some could meet, then that might, since people will probably be there.
Okay. Yeah. I'll work with the chair and see if that, whether or not that's possible. If not, we'll come up with that. I appreciate that. Okay. Madam Chair.
Yes.
May I move on to the next agenda item then? I will table that, bring it back to you.
Yes, if you go ahead.
The second item then is this annual IT monitoring plan. So this one will be hopefully far less controversial and less complicated in the sense that we do conduct these ongoing IT monitoring reports. We just gave you that update on the KBI fingerprinting project and told you good help. Our proposal this year is that we simply continue on with that program. It was one we evaluated as high risk and we're not done with it. So we felt like, if we want to continue that, that's been on our radar. Things are looking good. We'd like to conclude that. If at some point it looks like it's in such good shape that monitoring work isn't necessary for the remainder of the year, we will stop that. We'll write you a closeout memo. We'll come back to the committee with a newly suggested project. So for this year, we'd intend to at least try to follow that one up until we were more confident it's concluded. And then, of course, if that ends early, then we'll close it out and come to you for another one. If not, we'll just continue monitoring it throughout this year. So I would need, though, a motion, Madam Chair, for this, that you approve our selection of the continued monitoring of the KBI fingerprinting reports.
Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the monitoring report plan? Or
I make a
modify?
motion.
Representative Williams makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Gartner. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. On to operational reports. And Justin, we have 3, and then there's an item that I would like to bring up in this section as well.
Yes, Madam Chair, so I'll start, and I think this will actually be related to your item with our audit recommendation report. So we as your staff obviously track legislative or recommendations that have been implemented or that we are tracking as staff here. So I will show you what that currently looks like. I'm pulling up on our website. We maintain a list of previous audit recommendations. So Representative Gardner, this speaks a little bit to your question of how do we track this? We do track this as your staff, and we don't track them forever. And of course, we can't compel them, which I know is somewhat the spirit of your question. But we do keep in mind kind of where various previous reports are at, whether they say they will implement or not. This is self-reported, right? So whether we don't audit this, we don't necessarily hold them accountable. If they said, we think your idea is terrible and we're never going to do it, we just have to accept that. We're the auditors. We can't say that, oh, you have to do it. We tell you they can refuse us, or they can take whatever direction they as management want to. So every 6 months we update that list, and that comes up. And so this is one of those things. We just want to let the committee members, we want to put this in front of you every couple of years and say, hey, reminder, we track this on our website, that if you are interested in seeing or thinking, if you have an audit that you're curious about, we cover it for about a 2-year period. So once we're done, we give them a little time, like 6 months before we ever follow up with them. And then we track these things for a couple of years. We keep them updated out here on our website. So if you want to know how agencies are responding to us as your audit staff, where that stands in process, that's where this come up. And as the committee members might know, I sent a bunch of materials to just earlier this afternoon from Senator Denning. He had been tracking and watching closely the state's hospital tax. So that's that reimbursement program. And he had sent some materials. He has some concerns about KDHE's response to that audit. So we had shared that with you. That's where those materials came from, was in response to that previous audit. That is here, they comparing healthcare provider tax revenues to increase reimbursement. So, and we found in the audit that it looked like that program was being subsidized by state general funds. We did not believe that was consistent with legislative intent at the time. KDHE agreed with that as well. Since then, they appear to maybe taken slightly different view of that, or at least have not been able to get some of those changes implemented like we might have thought. And so that's the information from Senator Zink. So Madam Chair, I defer to you if you have any other issues you'd like to raise on that topic.
Well, yes, and I have had a conversation, I think maybe a couple of others on the committee, I'm not sure, with Senator Denning on the issue. And for that reason, I've asked Justin to have Senator Denning on this call so he can explain what's happening here and why it's important, especially going into a budget year. So Senator Denning, are you still with us?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm still here.
Great, thank you. Do you want to just give a little history, maybe in a little overview on why this issue has arisen and why it needs to be addressed, and then we can discuss it as a committee?
Sure, thanks for the time. I'll go very quickly. The program is very complex. It started in 2004, and it's a typical provider tax. We're all familiar with those. The nursing home bed tax is one where you tax yourself and bring down federal funds. This hospital tax is very similar to that. The fundamental flaw that the program has is that the revenue is based on 2010 hospital revenue. It doesn't change every year, but they take the money that they bring down and then increase the Medicaid fee schedule by a certain percentage. And that's how they deplete the money that they bring in. But the issue is, in a fee-for-service world, the expense can go to infinity and the revenue to pay for that is fixed at 2010. So we worked on this for about 6 years in Senate Ways and Means, had lots of hearings, lots of testimony. When CanCare came into play, it made it even more complicated. So we knew that the fund was deficit spending because the revenues are fixed and healthcare we know goes up every year. So we had an inclination that it was a deficit spending, but until the actuarial folks got into the CanCare and did the financial analysis, we weren't sure. So even though we knew it was deficit spending, we allowed it every year. But in 18, when LPA did the audit, the actuarial folks had already completed their audit just right before LPA came in. And they documented that it was overspending by about $15 million per year, and that the percentage add-on was too high and it needed to be adjusted down to make it budget neutral. So there's a panel that meets every year and reviews the program. And they came back with a recommendation to increase the tax from 1.83% to 3%. And at the end of the session, when we were getting ready to leave, we passed House Bill 2168 and House Bill 2246 to give KDHE the flexibility to increase that base. The first bill, 2168, had a fixed rate of 3%. KDHE sent that to CMS and they turned it down because it was not budget neutral. So they declined the request. And then right at the end of session, we passed another bill, House Bill 2246, where we gave KDHE the flexibility to go anywhere between 1.83% and 3% rather than just right to 3% to give flexibility. So CMS has not ruled on that yet. But I think where all the confusion comes from is these two bills. KDHE was in complete agreement with the legislature that the hospital tax should be budget neutral and that no SGF funds should ever be used to subsidize. So we were all in agreement. And I think when we passed these two bills, now we have a new Medicaid director that probably hasn't had time to get up to speed. No fault of hers. She's going to be a fantastic Medicaid director. I'm talking about Sarah Fertig, but I think they're missing the point that the legislature, now that we've had the actuarial study completed, we want this fund to be budget neutral to the SGF. And I think KDHE has taken the position since the legislature passed these two bills that we're just going to let it go on until CMS rules. But there's no timeline. CMS could take 5 years to rule on the request. So after I read KDHE's updated responses, I could see that they're not following the consistency that the legislature worked on for 6 years. So that's why I wrote the documentation to build the record. I plan on having another meeting with KDHE to go over it, but we haven't scheduled it yet. But that's the nut of the issue is it should be budget neutral. I have the fiscal note from 2004, and you can see that there is no SGF funds in there. It's all federal funds. So I think the legislature's documented the fact that this program should be budget neutral and not use SGF funds. And I think those two bills that we passed, I think that's got KDHE going down the wrong track, and I'm hoping that we can bring them back. The missing piece of information is the fee schedule on the non-hospital providers has been increased by a certain percentage. And I think we need LPA to go back in and look at those CPT codes and procedure codes by quantity and see which ones make up 80% of the spending so the legislature can see what codes that the appropriation is going towards. The issue that we have as legislators is that this program, it will appropriate funds without any legislative oversight if we don't bring it back into compliance. That non-elected officials that sit on the panel that benefit from the plan are actually making these decisions. And it should be a legislature decision anytime we appropriate money, but this expense can go to infinity for the most part. And that's why I don't want to lose sight of it. Obviously, I retire at the end of this year, and after 6 years of work, I don't want it to go to waste. I'd like to see it to the completion line. So thank you for the time.
Are there any questions for Senator Denning?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Representative Barker.
Senator Denning, when you're talking about having LPA to go back into the codes, I mean, there's thousands of codes. You want them to go back into all that coding that the hospitals do for different procedures and look if it's an 80-20?
You are correct, Representative Barker. There are 1,000 CPT codes, but there's only going to be a handful that make up 80% of the spending. And
Okay.
That's what I would like LPA to come back with. There'll probably be less than 50 CPT codes that make up 80% of the spending.
So if LPA would go back in, let's say post-audit goes back in, they would have a number that they could actually work on. 50 codes would make up the 80%. Is that what you're telling me?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? So it looks like, Justin, there would need to be a motion to either approve like a conceptual audit to bring back to the committee. And I'm not sure what the timing would be on that, but I think Senator Denning would like to have I'm missing the definition of a smaller scope audit.
Yes, so I would suggest, Madam Chair, if the committee is favorable to Senator Denning's concerns and that general audit concept, what I would ask you to do is to vote on, conceptually approving this audit, but then of course allow us to work with Senator Denning to define the scope and figure out, as maybe Representative Barker had pointed out, kind of a universe we can handle. We would look at the top 50 or 75 codes or whatever. We put some parameters around that to make sure that we could go look at that and keep it structured. We could determine then, working with Senator Denning, whether that would be a limited scope or not. You don't technically have to approve limited scopes through voice vote, but because I don't know whether it's going to be one of those or a regular one, I'm asking for greater protection for me. Like, give it approval. You'll still get a chance to see it. We'll make sure we bring it back to you in writing so you know what you're approving specifically. But if time is of the essence, that's what I would propose. It would prevent us from having to figure out another meeting where we develop a quorum to come back and approve it. You guys can approve it. State law gives you the authority to approve things kind of in concept, and then let us as staff come back and flesh it out with the actual details. So if time is of the essence, that'd be my proposal.
So what you're saying is we as the committee could direct you to work with the parties to provide a conceptual framework for an audit.
Yeah, and I think Senator Denning's provided enough of the general background. That concept is fairly fleshed out. We can go in looking at these specific codes to determine whether they are applied correctly, right? So we just have to define that a little further, but you already have kind of the general idea of the audit behind it. We just need to hammer out the details and we get a little time to work with the senator to make sure we understand exactly what that looks like and how much work we think that would take. But then my plan would be, even though the audit would technically be approved, before we went and took any action on it, started working on it, like we've done in the past on some of these audits we modified, we'd send out the committee, the proposal and say, here's what we've come up with. Please give us any feedback. If we ran into significant concerns, we could always ask for another vote down the road. But assuming there was none and there was general consensus, which is often the case, I think, in these situations, then you would be good. So that'd be my proposal.
So Are there any other questions from the committee then on what this is about?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
a question for Justin.
Yes, sir.
Justin?
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 Yes,
Well, I'm assuming this is, sorry.
Go ahead.
Justin, this is going to take more than a 100-hour audit, correct?
Well,
So this would be,
yeah,
and I know that
Yeah.
and I know that the chair has the discretion of making it a 200-hour audit.
I don't want to do that to you.
But that's within the rules. They can authorize 100, but the chair can add additional hours.
Mhm.
Is it, and the reason I asked about a short-term audit, it could be done, if it could be done quickly, or should it wait until we file our audit request in April? And that's a question for Justin.
Yeah, the analysis itself could be simple, the way that Senator Daines described it. We knew what codes we were looking for, and that was the universe. The problem I'm guessing we will always have on a lot of this size is we're dealing with Medicaid data, and that can be very difficult to procure. So what I suppose that what we could do is if you all wanted to still approve it conceptually, but say, look, let us work with Senator Denning. We'll have to figure out what the size is. If it's very small, then we just send you the language and the content. If it's large, then we'd ask you two questions, which is the content okay? And then where would you like to schedule it? Because I get your point. It could be large, or of course, the committee can direct us to work with Senator Denning to come with a proposal through the normal course. I can't give you, Representative Barker, a definitive answer to how long it would take without having some time to sit down with Senator Denning. I think it's probably not going to fall within, it may not fall within the 100-hour. We may be able to work up something with Senator Denning that keeps it still pretty tight, depending on exactly what procedures we think are necessary to satisfy his concerns. So it may be, it could be as small as like a month-long audit with a couple of people, but depending on the complexity, it could get larger. We'll have to work that out with him first.
So
Madam Chair.
Yes, Representative Gardner.
I assume, well, can we just then make a motion to allow Justin to work with Senator Denning to get the information available to come back to us and make a presentation on the scope, the hours,
Yes,
etc.?
Yes, that's exactly where we need to go. So,
So I would so move that we give Justin the authorization to do that.
is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Barker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. So, Justin, you'll be then working with Senator Denning on this. What do you think a timeline would be anticipated? Would this be something that could be ready to go? I don't know when the next meeting is going to be. What do you need, Justin?
Yeah, so since it seems like this is an important issue, we'll work on it ASAP with Senator Denning, and then we will try to put it on the committee agenda for the next meeting, whenever that is. Because we have some additional business items that are coming out of this meeting, which is completely understandable. There's a lot going on. This is virtual, so it's hard. I may be in order to have another brief meeting between now and the start session anyway, I'm sure. So I can maybe work with you, and this could be one of those agenda items, in addition to the IT security audits and in addition to the IT security plan, which I would like to get resolved sooner than later. So that could fit nicely into that. We can get a jump on that with Senator Denning. I think we've got a pretty good stroke. We just need a little bit more time. Not time. He's already given us good information. I need to put pause before I give you all any definitive commitment on all books.
Okay. All right. So Justin, then let's see, are we ready for audit recommendation report, write-off report, and then our meetings?
Yeah, so we're on now. So that covers our audit recommendation report. Just want to let the committee know that those have been updated and are up on our website. On the annual write-off report, so this is a very simple report that we provide you. State law requires that we report to the post-audit committee a list of debts that have been written off by the state in the previous year. So we collect that list from the Department of Administration each year, and we send you a summary of it. Here it is. You all may be wondering why this information is important or relevant to you all. I don't think it is super relevant now that we are no longer in the financial audit business. So you'll recall this is still a reporting requirement that is associated with our past work of being in the financial audit business. We are no longer. So this is actually one of the requirements that we have in that bill that you all have endorsed that I'll be bringing to the legislature this year to say, stop making me report to the post-audit committee this information because we don't think it's value added to this committee. It still goes to, it's still a report that DOA compiled, and they financial auditors probably are going to look at this in detail. They want to know all about the accounts receivables that the state is writing off. It's just not something we're doing. So, but as we often preach to state agencies, I'm going to follow the law while the law is in effect. I hope to change this process by actually getting it changed in state law. So whether or not you get much utility out of this report, it is my statutory duty to report it to you. So here it is. If you have any questions about the underlying data, we're happy to work with the agencies. But often the universities, these are student debts that they acquire with colleges that are not going to be paid back. So maybe a student that dropped out or has some long-term debt associated, not necessarily student loans, but other circumstances, parking fees, rental fees, housing fees, some of those type of things. So there's a lot of reasons state agencies write off debts. But this is the list. Madam Chair, happy to answer any question on that if committee members have them.
Are there any questions about the annual write-off report? Seeing none. Justin?
This is also a tab that speaks a little bit to Representative Gartner's earlier question. So this is something the committee added a little while back, where it used to be we'd send all the chairs of various committees an email blast when we had a meeting like today and say, hey, we released a lot of audits and you may be interested in some of them. We didn't feel like that was going far enough. We felt like that you all get a million emails a day, and I'm sure another email from post audit is not saying, hey, we released a bunch of reports that we want you to go read is not super great. So the committee supported this idea that we would set up meetings with the committee chairs in person to give them a briefing about the actual reports that we think are relevant. So instead of just notifying, I think we mentioned on the price verification audit, the agriculture committee to say, hey, there's an audit out here. We're going to go meet with the chair, the vice chair, and the ranking minority member and say, here's the things we want you to know about this audit in person. At least that was the plan pre-COVID. I assume we'll probably have something similar post-COVID. That was the idea. We'd actually go and meet with them. So this is the list. We did that last year. I think it went pretty well. I think it did a better job of connecting our work to the powerful committees and committee chairs, and a lot more audit presentations came as a result. I think then the chairs and the vice chairs and the rankings knew what was going on. We weren't hitting them cold. So I think there's a few tweaks we're going to try to make it a little more effective, but here's the list then of the committees we plan to meet with. And my only question to committee members, is there any committees that you think I'm missing relative to the reports that you heard today? So this covers not only reports you heard today, but pretty much for the past year. So as you look over that list, either now or later, if you think I've missed something, please let me know. We intend to kick this process off early in the session and start arranging these meetings with these chairs to try to connect, give them quick briefings on the results of all.
Mm-hmm.
So happy to answer any questions or take any suggestions. It looks like Representative Burrows has a comment on it.
And Justin, if I may, and Madam Chair, we talked about the budget committees and we give up just specified committees. I might suggest that we even give them to the budget subcommittees. I believe the budget subcommittees will have a chance. They're a smaller group. They really drill down on some of these budgets ahead of time, and that can prepare any work that needs to be done before it goes to either Senate Ways and Means or House Appropriations. That way, we can, as I stated, if any questions come forward, Justin, we're there to help you by putting it through a budget subcommittee.
Yeah, great comment, Representative Burrows. Just so the committee is aware, I do each year present a summary of all of our work to House Appropriations, Senate Ways and Means at large. So not the subcommittees, but the general committees. That's a very high level overview. It doesn't go into much detail, it's just kind of a big picture. You'll notice we have also here put several specific budget committees where we think those results would connect. Representative Burrows, in light of that, because we know you have some subject matter expertise, if you think that we need to present all reports to all budget committees, you could let me know. We could modify maybe our approach that way. Right now, we've tried to target those budget subcommittees on the House Appropriations side. Senate Ways and Means, we typically don't, just because they're much smaller bodies. They're 2 or 3 members typically. So once we present it to Senate Ways and Means as a whole. So certainly I agree. We do need often a lot. That's where a lot of you have the power of the purse in the budget committees, where you all can hold them accountable for how you want them to respond. So I appreciate that. I'll look at that. If you see something you think we're missing, Representative Burrows, let me know. Or if you think you'd like a broader thing, just let me know, and I'll be in communication with you on that. But I appreciate the thought.
Okay, moving along. Anything else on that? Hearing none. How about consent calendar, Justin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you'll receive a copy of the consent calendar memo previously. A few items here. We have the draft minutes for the committee's September 2nd meeting. We have, of course, the acceptance of all the performance audits that were released today. By accepting them, they just simply mean work is done here, right? Just closing the project and saying we've completed the work. It doesn't mean you necessarily agree with everything in our reports. And then, of course, we do have an approval of a limited scope audit. So this is a limited scope request from Senator Hensley, having us look into the Department of Commerce's control for conflict of interest, recognizing that they handle a lot of different business transactions, and just looking at how they kind of mitigate the risks associated with giving out a lot of those type of awards when they may know people in the industry, those type of things. The chair has preliminarily approved that. So that would be, so long as there's not an objection, just by virtue of having a forum today, that would be approved. And then the final piece is the KGOL designation. So we have the Kansas Government Operation Accountability Law. That's kind of an older piece of legislation, but the general intent is that we should be focused on making sure that government is efficient and cost effective. A provision of KGOL is that you, as the post audit committee, identify audits that you think we've done that fit some general definitions of that. We do that as your staff, and so here's our suggestion. You don't have to accept it, but it's more, you do well more than this. So we picked the 4 that we think best fit this. I think the committee is doing a lot of work almost all times in many of their audits to address cost savings and efficiencies and all these things. So we as staff have suggested these 4 as those we think best fit the intent of KGOL. All of these items, as usual, Madam Chair, without objection, would be approved. If someone wanted to abstain from the minutes, of course, that is an option for committee rule if they were not present. Otherwise, barring an objection, all these will be considered approved.
Was there any motion to object to any of the consent calendar items? Okay, they're approved automatically then. Thank you, Justin. All right, additional business, state fair audit and departing committee members. So Justin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I recently was contacted by former Senator Ed Berger, who many of you know is now acting or the executive director of the county fair. He is, I think, the 3rd executive director in as many months. I don't know if that's exactly true, but it's close. There's been a lot of turnover there. Mr. Robinson left his post earlier in the year, citing concerns of just the financial condition of the state fair, which has been hit obviously by COVID. So he just let me know. He said, we're maybe like the school districts, we're under great duress over here, right? We're on furlough. We didn't have a state fair this year. We're financially crunched. It may be tricky for us to accommodate a big post audit looking into kind of, how we work. And remember, part of the audit is looking for ideas of how other states fund their state fair and some of that general stuff. But part of it's also looking at their structures for financial controls and things like that. So they're already on the schedule. And as some of you may know, I don't typically make adjustments to the audit schedule once it's set. I usually tell auditees, I'm sorry, once you're on the schedule, you're on it. But they're on in March, which is really close to that April meeting. So they just basically have a toehold in our schedule. And if I push that back a month, then by committee rule, because I wanted to started it before the spring meeting, it will get added back to the hopper for your all's consideration. So what I told Mr. Berger, I said, I'm sensitive to what you're saying here. I know there's very unusual circumstances. I'll come to the committee and ask if I have their support for simply bumping this in our schedule till late April. Basically take it off my schedule. It will get pulled off by committee rules, and then you all would reconsider it as one of those other requests. That's one option. The other option is I just simply keep them on the schedule and accommodate them to my best of ability. I told him that may also be the outcome. I was like, I don't make a lot of modifications to this. you know, typically speaking, I wouldn't. I just tell sorry, once the committee's approved an audit, they've approved it and we're going. And I can tell Mr. Brewer that too, and he's prepared for that. These are, again, kind of like the school districts. I felt like this is a pretty unprecedented situation, so I wanted to give the committee a chance to weigh in. So, you know, I don't need a motion on this. I'm just looking for guidance. If I take it off, that doesn't mean we couldn't get it approved and I couldn't do the audit again later. It just would mean I'm not going to get started in March. So it's really the difference between starting in March or potentially postponing. Of course, the committee doesn't, you know, approve it, then it won't happen. But so I'm sure I'd happy to answer any questions about that issue.
Yeah.
Looks like Representative Gardner has a question, Madam Chair.
Representative Gardner.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. It just one recommendation, Justin, was to just move it on the schedule. Is that correct?
Well, by moving it, essentially, if I move it past the April date, then it's effectively what committee rule says is anything I haven't started before each spring meeting. So what they got approved the last meeting and haven't got started before the next one will automatically be rescinded. And so if I don't keep them on the schedule, that's what's going to happen automatically. So I probably phrased that poorly, Representative. I apologize. Essentially, what I'm asking is, do you all want me to proceed in March, or do you want me to have you reconsider this in April? That's the real question.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think I would suggest that we reconsider. I think the audit is important. That we need to complete that audit at some point in time, but I understand what they're going through, and that would be something I'd suggest.
Yes, I would agree with that. And thank you for the comment. So are there any other comments? So Justin.
Madam Chair, it looks like Representative Barker may have.
Oh, Representative Barker.
It looks like you're muted, Representative Barker. Representative Barker, we can't hear you. Oh, he may not be talking. I thought he would.
Did he fade away?
Well, he appears to be talking. I assume he's trying to talk to the committee, but it looks like he's still on mute. Representative Barber, I think you'd have to, I can maybe ask him, maybe that'll help him.
All right, now I have it now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, my comment is just, you know, we voted on it last April, approved the audit. And I have great appreciation for their problems, but it may not pass in April if it comes back on the list. You know, we'll have a different makeup of the committee. The Madam Chair will not be with us come January, and we'll all miss you because of that.
Oh, thank you.
You've been a great chair lady. But so my thoughts are, if the committee would agree that we will approve it again if we need to, but you know, they've made some preparation. They knew it was coming. Of course, it's been an unusual year, but if we started in March, then we would not need to put it back into the hopper and vote on it again. And next time it may not pass. I don't know that, but we will have a different makeup of the committee and have new members that may not be familiar with this audit at all. So I guess that's my concern. But with that, I mean, we can still advocate for it in April, should we want to delay it until the 1st of April, where it goes back in the hopper. But it just seems to me that we're doing our work again. We've already approved it. It should go forward. And if we approve it in April, does that mean we don't start it until next January or February, prior to next April, and then we kick it down the road again? So those are my comments, and I will go with the will of the committee. But my thoughts are, we can start it We don't have to have it completed. I know they would like to wait another year. And of course, they may want it not to pass next time. Nobody really wants to be audited. So those are the comments that I have. I'm of the opinion that we keep it on, start it in March, and let it proceed as we had anticipated, instead of putting it back in the hopper and then debating whether it's a priority or not a priority when we pick our 5 or 6 audits in April. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, those are excellent comments. I had that fear too. I obviously the state fair is extremely important for the state for a variety of reasons, and I would hate for it not to get approved. But so I guess my question would be, you know, if we leave it on and you start in March, is that something that, you know, when you start an audit, I've never, you know, I don't know how you work through an organization, how long that takes, how long your audits would take, what if there's a way to utilize that time because we have our foot in the door. Maybe the audit takes a little bit longer because of COVID, but it's on the schedule. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? So we start and we work with what we have at the time. Justin, can you comment on that?
Yes, Madam Chair. So here would be my proposal, and I think I want to concede 2 things. Representative Barker is correct. The committee has already taken action. So you all have done your business. You've authorized this audit. I am very reluctant to get in the way of that, which is why I brought this. You know, I wasn't going to kick this down the road and trigger a rule mechanism to get rid of it. I'm very sensitive to the fact you all approved that. So, and in general, I agree. I don't like auditees, regardless of how good the reason, avoid an audit, because I found over my years, it's never convenient. It's never a good time. That no one wants to be audited. We take a lot of time and effort and energy from the people we audit, and it's usually never a very pleasant scenario. So, but I am sensitive to schedule. What I would suggest then to the committee, given the input, is to try to concede maybe as much, both sides of that issue is, we'll push it maybe back a little bit towards April, get a slow start with them, tell them we'll work with you. We'll try, we understand you're under duress, you don't have a lot of staffing and stuff, but we'll do our very best to accommodate you to the extent that's reasonable, but we're gonna proceed with the audit, it's been approved. If in that process we were to discover that it is unrealistic, that for whatever reason they've suffered more than anyone else, I just come to the committee like I would any other auditee and say, I have some incredibly unusual circumstances that you all could reconsider. But I think it's probably wisest here in the committee's direction for me to do that in the context that the audit is a go, unless you all hear from me otherwise, that there is something highly unusual. You know, you guys have approved it. I will work with them. I did let Commissioner Berger know. I said, we will be reasonable. We're not going to come in here and just try to dump a bunch of stuff on you when you're going through that. But, you know, that may be possible. So, Madam Chair, looking at that, I'd like to think that'd probably be my plan, is we'll keep it on the schedule. That's typically our more orthodox position. Once you're on the schedule, you're on it. And especially I have the resources. But I will do my best to accommodate him and his staff, and will bring back to you anything if I find that it is unusually compelling in terms of their resources.
So Justin, do we need a motion for that? No.
No,
Okay.
that's a no.
Right. Okay.
I think I've got what I need. I just want to hear the committee's thoughts.
Okay. Any other comments? Sounds like you have your marching orders.
All right. So my final piece of additional business before we move into my executive session, so you all can give it to me in terms of my evaluation this year. Just want to recognize, of course, 2 outgoing members. Unfortunately, it sounds like maybe we have Senator Hensley on the line, but he's not able to speak. I'm sure that's some type of technical glitch on my part. So I apologize to Senator Hensley if he's listening now and unable to speak. Sounds like he could maybe have heard the meeting but can't comment, which is some weird technological thing I'm sure falls on me. But of course, I have to recognize Senator Hensley, not only the long-serving legislature in Kansas, I believe 44 years is the number I heard, but in post-audit committee, I thought the soonest he'd served on an LPA was 1992, but I've actually now found some audit reports with his name on it from 1989. So 31 years of at least off and on membership and post audit committee. So very much appreciate his service on our committee in those many years. He's been around for as long as I've been around, plus 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other post auditors. So definitely kind of an institution on our committee. Just wanted to thank him and recognize him. Hopefully you can hear that if I get a chance to do that in person. I apologize to him if my technological faults have kept him from participating today. And then, of course, Madam Chair, with you leaving 7 years ago, you joined us in 2013 and been only my second chair. So Senator Olson was my first chair, and then I believe Representative Barker in the middle. So my second senator, I believe, is the way to tally that. But appreciate your efforts. Sorry to see you go. Thank you for your service. Very much appreciated. So.
My pleasure. It was, all I have to say is, you know, I wish every legislator could have a chance at being on the committee, because it gives you just so much additional insight as to what's going on in our state. And it's to me, it's exciting. I think it's something that obviously is healthy to have that kind of an auditor's mindset, because it's taught me to, it's really taught me as a committee chair to have more insight. It's taught me how to think differently. So anyway, Justin, you've been awesome, and I wish you the best and the amazing team that you've put together.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the final thing we will need then is to have someone read the motion for, which would be actually, typically speaking, would be Representative Williams, for my evaluation, which I'll pull up here. This would not obviously be in room 546 South because we're meeting virtually now. So I apologize for not getting that corrected. But Madam Chair, if we could have either your vice chair or the ranking minority member read, if she's not available, the motion to go into executive session for my evaluation, that'd be appropriate at this time.
Okay. Let's see, Representative Williams, do you have that in front of you?
Say that again.
Do you have the motion?
I've got it up on the screen too, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, I do. I move to recess this open meeting for a second, for a closed meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters relating to the annual evaluation of the post auditor under the justification listed in KSA 75-4319B1, because such evaluation constitutes a need to discuss a personnel matter of non-elected personnel, to resume the open meeting to room 546S at what time?
3:35.
3:35, and to record this motion if adopted in the minutes as a part of the committee's permanent records.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Senator Sykes. Any opposed? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. All right. So we are going to say goodbye to Justin. And
so, Madam Chair, actually, to simplify this process, what we thought we'd do is just have Tom give me the result, your summary results all at once. So,
okay.
So don't spare my feelings. This will be your chance. I'm going to give other people a chance to get off the line real quickly. Attendees here that are not part of the executive session, I'll be removing momentarily here. Some of these folks. They may not be present, so I'm going to remove those. And Tom, if you would just run the committee through that, please, sir, I'll defer to you.
I'm ready to go whenever.
There you go.
Everyone's ready.
Great.
Yes, sir. And there's one other line, but I assume the 296-7763 number may be Senator Hensley. So I'll take my chances. If it's some other member of the public, then they'll get insider. I'll need to remove the revisers. All right, Tom, go ahead, please, sir.
Madam Chair, as you know, the Legislative Post Audit Committee, Rule 5-1 requires an annual audit or an annual evaluation of the post auditor. And as the executive committee of the Legislative Post Audit gave permission for Legislative Post Audit Committee Rule 5-1 requires an annual or an annual evaluation of the post auditor. And as the executive committee of the Legislative Post Audit gave permission for Legislative Post Audit Committee Rule 5-1 requires an annual or an annual evaluation of the post auditor. And as the executive committee of the Legislative Post Audit gave permission for Legislative Post Audit Committee Rule 5-1 requires an annual or an annual evaluation of the post auditor. And as the executive committee of the Legislative Post Audit gave permission for Legislative Post Audit Committee Rule 5-1 requires an annual or an annual evaluation of the post auditor. And as the executive committee of the Legislative Post Audit gave permission for